Welcome to Warping Fist.
A man running towards a church, wielding a knife. A gruesome murder taking place in what appears to be a freezer. A man wielding a knife, running past large gears. Another concealed in thick foliage. And finally, another man running from the same church. Perhaps escaping a heinous act that has been committed. As many of you realize, nothing remotely similar to this scenario ever takes place in Batman Arkham Asylum, but that's often the case when it comes to the development of games that go through several phases before the final product is ever released. The same can be said for the early development of Batman Arkham Asylum, which underwent substantial changes over the course of its development, and the early versions of the game were much different from what we are used to. The 2007 version of Arkham Asylum, otherwise known as the Arkham Asylum Pre-Alpha, can no longer be played. However, with help from game preservationists back to life, we get the next best thing, a deep dive into this game's many mechanics and ambitious ideas. So, let's take a journey through the pre-alpha of Batman Arkham Asylum, a vision that was present before the game underwent a large creative shift in terms of mechanics and visuals. Development for Arkham Asylum began in 2007 after Eidos acquired the license and hired Rocksteady to work on the game. Rocksteady's vision early on for the project aimed for something both grim but also very ambitious, as early conceptual artwork showcased locations not seen in the final game, like the lighthouse and Chapel Rock, which was its own separate island equipped with a crypt, a church, and other expansive locations. Now these areas represent Rocksteady's early ambition for Arkham Asylum, to the point where these locations seem to be present in conceptual 3D models for the game. Not only that, the storyboards also show what appears to be a church, which may be within Chapel Rock, indicating that the location had important story significance. However, we can't actually be sure that the storyboards do indeed depict this location. This early shot of the map represents how large the original Arkham Asylum map was. There's a central island area with smaller islands connected to it. The larger island branches off into 3 large connective structures, which are likely the facilities in the game. Unfortunately, the areas aren't marked, so it's hard to say what buildings these are supposed to be, or if areas like Chapel Rock and the lighthouse are even present within these smaller islands. You can see just how much Rocksteady tweaked the layout of the island. In fact, according to some in-game files, it's possible a form of fast travel existed in the game, using the Batwing as a primary mode of transport. The only reason the map would have fast travel is if, of course, the map was large enough to require such a system. Rocksteady would later realize that they were being too ambitious and would choose to downscale the size of the map, causing areas like the lighthouse and Chapel Rock to be cut, but that's if these locations were even present.
In terms of Chapel Rock and the lighthouse being part of the 2007 build of the game, I'm not 100% sure. There's obviously the early conceptual 3D model of the map which includes these locations, and a chapel is seen in the storyboards, but as far as it being included in the files of the build itself, there doesn't appear to be any reference. There's definitely a more gothic architecture in the build, including statues of horses and other alternative gargoyles, but nothing currently found relating directly to Chapel Rock and the lighthouse.
As Rocksteady continued to develop Arkham Asylum, the game's general aesthetic and art style would develop, harkening back to the grim style of the conceptual work. the visuals of the early Arkham Asylum aren't that different from the final game. It still maintains the dark and moody atmosphere, which you can see in some early locations for the game, such as this hallway, which is bleak, only illuminated by the light piercing into the room. There's also some early shots of locations like the sanatorium, which gives off the same dark vibe. These two images basically represent the visuals of the 2007 Arkham Asylum, much darker, giving off a very oppressive atmosphere. In fact, we know that these dark visuals represent the initial vision for the project, as this dark location seen in this image was used in this image shared by Jamie Walker, which was an internal promotional image created for the game.
You wouldn't initially think, based on some of the character designs, that there would be much visual crossover between the alpha version of the game and what we got in the retail release. However, a lot of things actually stayed more similar than you'd think. For example, the presence of the signature Arkham Scarab Beetle. That iconography was present all the way back in 2007. A lot of assets in terms of tall doors, grimy corridors, and railings made its way to the retail release.
You can tell just how much more grim Arkham Asylum was during early development because of this image present in early promotional images. Now, since images like this are typically sourced from later versions of a game, this means that the early Arkham Asylum had much more gruesome imagery, like the presence of blood. In fact, within the files, there are several images of different bloody imagery, like blood splats, bloody handprints, and blood trails. When Rocksteady first began development on Arkham Asylum, several concept arts were created for Batman. Now, what's interesting is that Batman had a very particular look in these illustrations. He took on a much more skinny form compared to the retail version, and his suit wasn't black and gray and instead took on a fully black look. And clearly, Batman's cape was much larger, enveloping his whole body. This suit is what would ultimately be translated into the 2007 version of the game. As you can see, it very much reflects how the suit appears in the conceptual artwork. Batman's suit takes on a dark blue and gray color scheme, and some models have his cape enveloping his entire body. The only semblance of color from this suit is the golden bat belt, which sticks out from the dark blue and gray bat suit. The suit also looks more armored than the retail version, with a distinct chest area and shoulder pads, which makes it appear slightly like the Christopher Nolan Batsuit.
We couldn't discuss the visual direction of the game without talking about Batman. He's a much more old, grizzled Batman who is in the later stages of his crime-fighting career. He's experienced and he's confident in his skill set. Early internal renders of the suit actually showcase it with a much darker colour palette and more pouches on the belt. This would look more in line with the Nomex survival suit that Bruce wears in the Batman Begins movie. Notably, this promotional render in specific actually has Batman with white eyes, something that we only ever see in the retail release of the game when detective mode is active. The suit looks like it's made of a hard leather material with shoulder pads and zippers on the boots and on the gauntlets. Even Bruce's arsenal would reflect this more stylized approach to the character. For example, the batarangs were serrated and had many edges, akin to something from the Schumacher movies.
Now, it's important to know that a lot of shots of the suit appear unfinished, as this was a pre-alpha after all, so the suit very much has incomplete textures. However, thanks to Back to Life, we have a good idea on what the final suit would have looked like if this version of the game progressed. Much like the retail version of the suit, this version looks very grim. The suit perfectly reflects the visual tone of what this version of the game would have looked like, darker and more stylized as well. After the drastic creative shift of the game's vision, the developers would move away from these stylized character designs and props, instead opting for a more realistic and comic-accurate look. Early on in Arkham Asylum's development, exploration was much more linear, requiring the player to go down a predetermined path. As development progressed, they decided to ditch this approach and instead opt for something more expansive.
There were also a number of collectibles, including tarot cards, which are present in the game files, likely a reference to the comic A Serious House on a Serious Earth, where an attempt is made to wean Harvey Dent off his iconic coin by using tarot cards instead. There were Poison Ivy flowers, Two-Face coins, and Killer Croc scales. There were also Joker spray cans as well, which likely were substituted for the chattering teeth that are found in the retail release of the game.
When you found a certain amount of collectibles, you could actually reveal a series of tiles until the tiles revealed a new gadget which you could pick up at the Batmobile. However, eventually, these collectibles would all be streamlined into the Riddler trophies. Now you might be wondering if the story of Arkham Asylum had any significant differences early on in development. Well, not really. If you listen to in-game audio, you'll notice that several plotlines are still present in the game, such as the Joker kidnapping Gordon.
Why, of course. Who else did you expect? I played you like they chop you off, bats, and now I'm in control. Oh, and in case you wanted to come after me, I have arranged for a little distraction. Ha 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 ha! Look at the screens. See your friend Jimmy boy? Looking all nice and safe with that nice Arkham gun?
Time to continue following Harley Quinn and Gordon's trail. There's Gordon. Looks like they've got him under guard. If anybody spots me, they'll execute him.
There's also a plotline involving Batman saving the Arkham doctors from Joker's thugs, especially when it comes to characters like Dr. Young, whose mission structure is basically the same, judging by the identical dialogue.
I know. I've got one more room to search and then all the staff will be safe. You stay here.
Why are you doing this? I've done exactly what you asked.
Not my problem, lady.
I am quite aware that this job, as you call it, requires friends. What I want to know is why you chose me. Did Joker specify me? Why don't you let me talk to him?
Joker still has an interest in her at this point in the game for her development of the Titan formula, which is what I'd like to say, but there are some major differences.
Some key characters from the retail game also make an appearance, such as Dr. Penny Young, who in this version is a much older woman, wearing large, thick-rimmed glasses, compared to the young Doctor that we see in the retail release. One particular standout was the Titan henchmen that you fight in the retail game, whereas here they were called the Venom henchmen, and they had physical implants into their bodies, which Venom was presumably injected into, particularly into the spinal region. In fact, it's a near one-to-one replication of the original concept art.
There's also one other significant plot difference, and that's regarding what Joker was doing before the events of the game. In the retail version, we're told that Joker took over City Hall and took the mayor hostage, while the pre-alpha implies that Joker launched some kind of attack within a stadium.
What was it like? I heard the Joker killed thousands at the stadium.
Besides this, the game very much still had the same characters.
Characters like Joker and Gordon are more stylized than they are in the retail release of the game.
There's something very interesting about the 2007 version of the game, such as shots of an open grate leading into a cell and a man walking out. There's also a shot of someone squeezing what appears to be blood into a bucket before tossing that blood onto the asylum statue. This is done by the Scarecrow, who takes on a very different appearance in this version of the game.
You're supposed to be fighting, not dancing!
The core gameplay of Arkham Asylum still relied on three core pillars: combat, stealth, and detective work. In fact, The focus on these three modes of gameplay were to such an extent that they weren't really seamlessly integrated into the gameplay experience. Take a look at this controller scheme. According to the controls, the player had to switch between different modes: Predator mode, Brawl mode, and presumably Detective mode. This does indicate that Rocksteady weren't entirely sure on how to integrate all these styles of gameplay seamlessly, and this is likely because at the time, the game was less focused on automating the player's experience when it came to automatic animations. If you don't understand, this will become very clear to you by the end. Now, certain mechanics are the same as the retail version, like right bumper to grapple, and pressing the D-pad lets you access your gadgets. However, almost everything else is different. You have to press the left bumper to use a gadget, Y to enter forensics, which is likely detective vision. Pressing down the left analog stick activates Predator Cam, which was likely some kind of surveillance system that lets you analyze a room during a stealth encounter. Pressing the back key accesses your log, which becomes important very soon. And finally, pressing X grabs an enemy. Now, it's not entirely clear what this would have been used for. Perhaps it allows you to grab enemies in order to question them to progress through a level. According to in-game animations, Batman is capable of walking while holding an enemy as well. Grabs will become very important later on in the video. Originally, before the free flow combat was integrated, the combat system was described as similar to a rhythm game, where players had to attack to the beat of music. It's quite hard to imagine how this combat system would have looked like in-game. Luckily for us, this combat may have been present in the 2007 version of the game, and the best way I can describe the system is an omnidirectional version of Punch-Out and a rhythm game. Combat is structured in a four-directional like arena, left to right, forwards and backwards. In the game, it seems Batman could attack in these four directions, and enemies could attack you from these directions as well, with players having to act accordingly based on enemy placement and what they were doing. Enemies could grab the player and then proceed to attack Batman. Players were then able to break out of a grab and then attack while being grabbed as well. Players could dodge incoming attacks from two directions, left and right, and you likely had to dodge based on which direction the enemy was punching. You could also dodge a combo chain from a thug coming from the left or right, as Batman backs off and ducks as well. Players can also dodge downwards, initiating a ducking animation. However, you can also fail a dodge as well, as there's animations of Batman getting hit.
If anyone in the arena was betting on Batman, you still have time to change your tiny minds.
When a player successfully dodges an enemy attack, it's possible to transition over to your own attack to retaliate, perhaps being this game's form of countering. According to in-game tutorials, it seems Batman could also use a form of disarm. Batman had the ability to redirect incoming enemies, either from the front, the back, the left, or the right.
Batman would be able to redirect an enemy if the player held the B button and pushed the left stick in a specific direction that they would like to redirect them into. You could redirect enemies into walls or over railings to result in a knockout, or alternatively, you could redirect someone into a junction box for an environmental takedown.
Batman has a series of his own attacks as well, such as a quick punch to the left, right, front, and back. He can also kick to the left, right, front, and back as well. And it seems he has a form of a charge attack where he crouches and then shoots forward with a power punch.
Never saw that one coming!
Batman also had the ability to throw enemies away. Batman could initiate a takedown animation on a thug, which varies depending on what position the thug is in.
That guy never stood a chance! That's really got your head!
The ground pound also made an appearance in this build of the game, known as the floor takedown, which functions near identically to how it does in the retail release of the game. The special combo takedown also makes an appearance in this build of the game, however it is simply known as the takedown. This would be indicated to the player by a flashing bat symbol in the bottom left of their screen.
Batman has a takedown called the Junction Box Takedown, which involves him slamming a thug through presumably a junction box, which is a form of an environmental takedown.
Both Batman and enemies could block, and typically the enemies who would block would be the red high security outfit henchmen. They would typically have more health. You could break through their block with a heavy attack, or alternatively redirect them when they did end up attacking you. Or, if your timing was good enough, you could even attack them whilst they were in the attack state, managing to hit them before they hit you.
These blocking enemies wearing red high security outfits would make their way into the retail version of the game through the form of the knife-wielding enemies. Other special enemies were the straitjacket henchmen, who are very much still present in the game at this point in time, but it's not entirely clear what these enemies could do. Now, stealth is equally as interesting as the combat mechanics, and for this section, we'll have Back to Life explain the stealth mechanics.
Predator gameplay also had some significant differences compared to the retail release of the game. Instead of being called Invisible Predator, it was called Silent Predator. There were more depths in the moves of Batman's core arsenal. For example, the inverted takedown. You could drop down from a vantage point and choose to choke someone out silently or drag them back up. You could also drop down from ledges, surprise a thug, and then attach a reel to their feet to send them up to a vantage point. Interestingly, most Predator takedowns initiated with a single state known as the grab. The grab gave you the option to either complete the takedown silently or throw the enemy, for example, ultimately giving the player more choice in how they approach these situations. Some of the main notable key differences in Predator don't just come from Batman's moveset. In fact, they come down to the way that you handle the encounters. Silent Predator would include lockdown mechanics and operators. The lockdowns would trigger a security door at each exit and flood the area with gas. This is confirmed by subtitle data from the NPCs, as well as the voice lines that I've extracted from the game. NPC dialogue also confirms that the gas used in the lockdowns is actually based on Scarecrow's fear toxin, repurposed to incapacitate rather than induce fear.
He's here! Lock down! Trip the lockdown! Get reinforcements in here! Hit the lockdown!
Tell me more about these lockdowns.
There are lockdown points on the walkway. If a lockdown happens, no one is getting out of here.
How can you be so sure?
The lockdown triggers a security door at each exit, as well as flooding the area with gas.
Gas?
Yeah, the head doctor's been working on a new pacifying gas for prisoners. I heard she's based it on Crane's work. You know, the Scarecrow? Really scary stuff.
This would likely result in a game over state if triggered. Operators, specifically radio operators, can trip the lockdown and call for reinforcements. These types of thugs would have been specific and urgent targets for the player. The control scheme also mentions something called Predator Camera, a dedicated camera mode to assess the situation in Predator encounters.
Welcome to the Batman Forensic tutorial.
One of the key elements of Arkham Asylum's exploration connected back to one of the game's core mechanics that seemed to be the primary vision and focus by the developers at the time. In fact, out of every core mechanic, detective missions have some of the most visual elements and graphic work present in the files. Detective work was a mechanic that saw the player use a plethora of detective-based tools to solve a series of mysteries that took place within Arkham Asylum, especially when it came to missing Arkham staff and prisoners.
Oracle?
Hi.
Talk me through this forensic scanner.
We developed a system that allows you to scan, analyze, and filter forensic evidence on the fly. We've developed a system that allows you to scan, analyze, and filter forensic evidence on the fly.
Good. How does it work?
When in a crime scene, you can use your scanner to scan and analyze specific evidence. Press the left trigger to enter scanning mode.
Significant enough?
Yes. Well, for instance, we can't guarantee a successful scan with a partial print. Not enough to create a full print filter. You'll need to make sure you select a full handprint. Once a filter is created, press Y to turn on the filter mode.
Clever.
This tool, described in the audio, was called the forensic scanner. By activating it, the player could enter a forensic scanner mode, which we have several visuals for in terms of how the HUD would have looked like. Anyways, here you could do one of two things. One, you could scan for handprints around an area, but one print was not enough, since prints were incomplete most of the time. The player was required to scan multiple partial prints in several locations in order to create a full handprint or fingerprint. Once the full handprint was created, the player could essentially track those prints to a designated area. You can see a rough illustration of this handprint in one of the storyboards, and we have a good idea on how these prints look like in the game as well. However, you can also see illustrations of footprints in this storyboard, meaning you could track them as well. There are visual representations of different footprints that can be found within the game files as well, some being footprints and some bare feet.
Filter the DNA to locate other matches from the victim.
There's also a DNA isolation minigame, according to this audio, to get a better grasp of how investigations work within this game. Let's take a look at one of the many investigation plotlines in the pre-alpha.
Thanks for your help with the Joker, Batman. I don't want to waste your time with trivial matters, but things have seemed a little out of place around Arkham lately.
What is it, Mr. Lloyd?
One of my staff, a young fella named Frank Hanrahan, seems to have vanished. His wife called early this afternoon looking for him, and she told me he never made it home.
I'm sure it's nothing, but when people start vanishing at Arkham, it can never be a good sign.
One of the murder mysteries involves a guard and an inmate. You would need to speak to an NPC called Scott Green in the asylum main hall, the missing guard being someone called Frank Hanrahan.
Do guards follow a regular routine?
I guess he'd have spent most of last night in his booth.
Have you heard from Officer Hanrahan?
No, don't get him pissed. I had to cover his shift. I heard his wife called earlier, and when I call his cell, it keeps going straight to voicemail.
Batman should continue to question the guard to gain insight on what has happened.
Did you notice anything strange in the cell block last night?
I wasn't on duty last night. Speak to Green. He may be able to help on that one.
Frank's locker number was 105, which you would extract prints from and track these back to cell block B. The suspect for the murder was located in cell B27, however, he seemed generally too weak to be a murderer.
What can you tell me about the prisoner in cell B27?
He's just another loon. He's listed as harmless, but he's been getting more agitated recently.
No, and there's only one inmate, Billy. He's not like the other loons. We keep him here for his own safety. Sure, I'll open his cell for you.
Do you know what happened here?
Oh, don't hurt me. Keep away. Keep away. I need to be in a happy place.
Listen to me. Someone has been hurt here. Did you see anything?
I see you. I see you, Mr. Batman. You can't get me. If I stay awake, I'll be fine. Sleep is the enemy. I'm okay if I'm awake. Keep the nurses away. I don't want any of their medication. When we sleep, the bad men come. They won't get me, though.
What was interesting is that you could find fertilizer in the cell block, and the DNA trail would go past the locked door in the utility room. Fertilizer is obviously something that you would associate with a glass house or a place to grow plants. Your next goal would be to visit the glass house to see if there was any information or evidence that you could find. You enter the glass house and find that there is fertilizer all over the place, and you notice that there is freshly moved earth. You notice that outside the glass house there is a laundry cart which was taken from the utility area of the asylum, which was used to dump the murder victim's body. Numerous footprints, handprints, and even a faceprint can be scanned at the various murder scenes to gather evidence. You return to the cell block and find that an inmate called Billy has been murdered.
Batman! Over here! I thought Billy was asleep, But he's dead!
You are in a crime scene. The body is surrounded by DNA. Scanning the DNA will create a filter that can be used to isolate this DNA from other samples in the area.
As part of an investigation relating to the lockdown of the cell block, you are tracing back the steps of a guard called Frank Green. Frank Green's prints are found all over this murder scene. You trace them back to another cell and find the cell with its ventilation grate ripped off. The guard had clearly used the lockdown as cover for an escape and has used the grate as his way out of the asylum.
What I find really interesting is that you can actually refuse to investigate this scenario according to in-game dialogue.
I've got one weird-ass situation here in cell block A. The duty guard, Al Gordon, has vanished. Weird as still, someone activated a lockdown on this block. It's sealed shut. No way in or out. What on earth happened?
I'll look into it.
Thanks. I didn't know Al that well, but I hope he's okay.
I haven't got time.
What?
Now you know what I meant when I said Rocksteady moved towards more automated mechanics. Based on everything we've seen, combat, stealth, and detective features in the 2007 version of the game required much more player choice and interaction. You basically had to be involved in every step of the process. When the game went through its large creative shift in vision, perhaps Rocksteady felt that these mechanics were too tedious, so as a result, many features were streamlined and automated instead of making players decide on what to do. Batman automatically knocked out an enemy with a button press instead of holding them. Free flow combat was introduced, allowing Batman to chain animations, combos, and counterattacks himself, and detective work was relegated to scanning key points of interest and trailing missions. Ultimately, it's up to you if this automation of the game's mechanics was a good or bad thing.
The game evolved into what Sefton Hill later compared to as a more adult version of what people grew up with through Batman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures. This is the most logical thing that I can think of, where they wanted to keep a balance of the different characteristics of what makes a Batman story good. A fine balance of detective work, combat, stealth, and testing his limits as a character to see how far you can push him in a given situation. Considering that the original vision for the game was a much more slow, methodical, and deliberate experience, the shift in vision and focus would make far more sense.